This is Community Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an outstanding guest, a person that you should know. He's known as Mike, but he's attorney Michael J. Perillo, Jr. from Grays Lake, Illinois, and he's a candidate for Lake County State's Attorney as a Democrat.
That's correct.
Greetings, Mike.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brooks. It's good to be with you.
We're very happy that you've taken time from your very busy schedule to be with us on the Community Forum, because you are definitely a person that Lake County should know. Just yesterday, we were on WKRS radio, and I thought you needed more time. It was 30 minutes, but I thought you needed more time to tell Lake County who you are. But Mike, I like for you, and you prefer to be called Mike, right?
Either way, Mike is fine. Michael's fine, too. My mom would call me Michael, and she'd call my father Mike to differentiate the two of us when I was growing up.
Okay, tell our listening audience, and our listening audience, that Lake County is approximately 750,000 people, you know, and Comcast airs all over. This in Waukegan, it airs at 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, but in different locations at different times. So the Lake Forest, Highland Park, and they have their own, and also it airs at Time Warner in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But you won't have people voting for you in
No.
Kenosha, Wisconsin.
But they can call their friends in Lake County.
Yeah, it also airs in Chicago on CAN TV too. But so tell our listeners a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Well, I was born in New York City. That's where I grew up. And after graduation from law school, I went on active duty with the Navy as a judge advocate officer.
Oh.
That's how I came to Lake County. I was stationed at Great Lakes between 1983 and 1987. I worked there as a JAG officer. My first assignment, as I recall, was as a prosecuting attorney at courts martial. And then after that, I spent over 2 years as the lawyer for the commanding officer at the Service School Command at Great Lakes. That was a very large command, a training command for enlisted persons. I was the only attorney there, and if I recall correctly, the population of the command would be anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 plus, depending upon time of the year. I mention that because any legal issues that arose in the command would essentially cross my desk. Now, the commanding officer, my boss, of course, makes all the decisions on those legal matters, but he would look to his attorney for advice and for counsel in making those decisions. After leaving the Navy, I decided to stay here in Lake County. I've been here 32 years.
Wow.
All my time as an attorney has been spent here in Lake County. My first job after the Navy was as a felony assistant in the Lake County Public Defender's Office, and that was a bit just under 2 years, as I recall. And then I moved over to the Lake County State's Attorney's Office, where I was a felony assistant for a bit over 2 years. In 1992, I became associated with the law firm that I'm with to this day. So that's been, what, in excess of 22 years, I would say, with the same law firm. We are located in Waukegan, always have been located in Waukegan, and we are directly across the street from the Lake County Courthouse. My wife is a local person. She's born and raised here in Northern Illinois. We have one child. Our daughter is 20. She is an undergraduate at the University of Pittsburgh.
Law school?
I don't think so. No, she seems to have a gift for mathematics, and my guess is she'll wind up going to graduate school for mathematics, but we'll have to see how that plays out.
Okay. It's fantastic. I guess I can relate to you at Great Lakes. I retired in 1990, from the Public Works Center at Great Lakes as an equal employment opportunity manager. And you were there during 83, 87, so you're there the same time frame that I was there. But what piqued your interest to the law profession in the beginning?
That's a good question, and I don't know that I have a definitive answer for you. When I got out of college, I really didn't know what I was going to do. When I was very fortunate, I had a job at Kennedy Airport in New York City for a couple of years.
Okay.
And while I was working at that job, I was thinking about the future and decided to go to law school. It looked like a good opportunity. It was a good decision in hindsight. When I received the letter indicating I would be attending law school, as I recall, I very shortly thereafter went to see the Navy recruiter because I knew that I wanted to spend some time in the service.
Okay.
And I wound up going to the recruiter before I had ever set foot in a law school classroom.
Okay.
As time went on, at some point, I don't recall when, but during my first year of law school, I was accepted into the program with the Navy. And upon graduation and passing the bar exam, I went on active duty as a Navy lawyer. And the rest I've explained to you just a few moments ago.
Now, for some students that may be watching the program, what's the criteria? I see you've been in the field for 32 years, but what would you recommend courses they take in high school if they want to go enter law school?
There are no specific courses that one needs to take to go to law school. I know in the medical profession you're required to take courses such as biochemistry and other related courses, biology. There's no specific pre-law curriculum, but I think if you speak with any attorney or any pre-law advisor, the advice would be to study courses like constitutional law if they're offered, and many universities do offer that on an undergraduate basis.
Okay.
Certainly history, political science. I personally think English composition is crucial, as would be courses in speech or perhaps even a basic course in theater, because attorneys need to communicate.
Okay.
So if you can communicate with the written word, English composition, and if you can communicate in the oral word, say in speech class or in theater class, these are all skills you'll wind up using later on in the legal profession. So those would be good preparatory courses, I think, for a law career and for pre-law.
Well, I was right on target then. I had a generic list of writing skills, reading, history, as you mentioned, speech, of course, natural there, negotiating skills, and also writing, of course.
And when you mention negotiating skills, again, as an undergraduate, I don't know that universities would offer negotiating courses. Perhaps if they had a labor relations type major, they may have that. But it strikes me that certain basic psychology courses would also be helpful, because you may learn something about human interaction, and of course, that's part of what attorneys do.
Well, Mike, what is the mission, overall mission of the Lake County State's Attorney's Office?
Well, the State's Attorney's Office represents the people of Lake County.
Okay.
And as a broad explanation, there are both criminal and civil divisions. I think most folks are knowledgeable of the criminal division. The Lake County State's Attorney's Office will prosecute crimes committed within the county, and we all know that. But in the civil division, the office would represent the county in civil lawsuits which are brought in Lake County. So it's twofold. Again, I think most people will associate the State's Attorney's Office with the criminal courts, but we also need to keep in mind that there's a civil component to it also.
So basically, the two basic components of civil
and criminal.
Right?
That's correct.
But there's other.
Well, there are other
opportunities
functions
there,
of the
too.
office. I mean, the State's Attorney's Office will certainly appear and represent the state in juvenile court proceedings.
Okay.
And it escapes me at the moment. There may be a few other things that go on. But again, I think generally it's the criminal and civil aspect of the office which is paramount.
Also, relationship with public defender's office. So your state's attorneys are prosecuting in another avenue, the public defender, but do you have a relationship with with him?
Well, we talked about this the other day on the radio, and the relationship is professional, it's cordial, but
Okay.
keep in mind, of course, that the role and the mission of the public defender is to represent indigent criminal defendants.
Okay.
The role of the state's attorney's office in the criminal courts is to represent the people and the state in the prosecution of those cases.
Mm-hmm.
So in our legal system in this country, I think as most of us know, we describe it as an adversarial type of situation where both sides are adverse to each other.
Mm-hmm.
The judge, of course, is neutral,
Mm-hmm.
and the case is brought to a conclusion in that manner, in that adversarial position. In my experience, the relationship between public defenders and state's attorneys is typically professional and cordial, and that's how I describe it.
Well, you would be a prosecutor, and a public defender would be
Well,
negotiating for
well, the defense
a lesser
attorney.
sentence or something.
Yeah, that can happen, sure. And then typically most cases in the criminal courts are disposed of through negotiation. The negotiation would take place between the attorneys, the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney, whether that be the public defender or a private defense attorney. The judge, of course, again, is the neutral arbiter, the neutral magistrate to make sure that procedures are followed appropriately and that the rights of the defendant are protected.
You know, we talked before about the prison system. The majority, maybe 80%, that's maybe a little high, but mostly minorities, African Americans, and also Hispanics and so forth, you know. The way the public envision this is that more sentences are negotiable in the public defender maybe offer a lesser sentence, and because like the people are indigent and they don't have the money to get an attorney to really defend them, and so that's one of the reasons why the prison system is so filled with.
I don't know that I agree with that, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I worked as a felony assistant in the public defender's office, and I have to say that when I was in the public defender's office, in my own personal experience and in general, my knowledge of public defenders, these are very dedicated people.
Okay.
And I believe that the vast majority of public defenders go into that area of the profession because they truly believe in the justice system. They truly believe that each of us is entitled to a proper defense. And in my experience, they, again, generally work very, very hard to represent the clients to the best of their ability. And that's important because when you have an adversarial position, you need to have an effective advocate for the defense, just as you have an effective advocate for the people, for the prosecution. And I think if you have effective advocates on both sides, typically you'll get a proper result in the case.
Well, in your own opinion, why do you think there's such a great number of minorities in prison?
You know, we talked about that the other day, and I can't offer an opinion on that. What I would say is I would want to be educated by, say, sociologists and criminologists. But what I did say the other day, I'll repeat again, which is it seems to me that there's a movement in the country on both sides of the political aisle to address the vast amount of people we have incarcerated in this country. It's quite high. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we can deal with what I suppose might be characterized as an overpopulation of the prison population in this country is to take a close look at cases when they first come into the criminal justice system. Nonviolent first-time offenders, we need to look at those cases closely, and we need to assess whether or not we can bring those cases to a conclusion in a manner which does not include incarceration, rehabilitation, treatment if necessary. We do have programs in Lake County that are attempting to do that, and I think we need to certainly enhance those programs and use those programs to the extent possible. Because I think we would all agree that with nonviolent offenders, the better course is to get these people, who are typically young people, back on track and into society as contributing members of society.
So that the opportunity is there for you to recommend offenders in the different courts. They got different courts that you could recommend nonviolent crimes.
Well, that's great. That's right. And we in Lake County have a veterans court. We have mental health courts. They have a drug court. But even beyond all of that, even for nonviolent offenders who are not in what we might call a specialty court, it is still possible to fashion a sentence which would rehabilitate the offender. And again, particularly we're looking at nonviolent offenders who are first offenders. The Illinois Constitution actually has a clause which, and I'll paraphrase, but it says words to the effect that sentencing should be utilized to restore the offender to useful citizenship. And that's in the Illinois Constitution. And I think the more we look at that and try to live up to that position, or that policy, I think would be a better word, the better off we're going to be in the long run.
Well, I'm sure there's probably not a typical day in the state's attorney's office, but you walk into that office, and tell us about your managerial experience on how would you run the office.
Well, in terms of managerial experience, the 2+ years I spent at the Schools Command at Great Lakes was invaluable, because again, each and every legal matter, whatever it might be, which came up in that command, would cross my desk. And I was very, very fortunate that toward the end of my service there, I was awarded a Navy Commendation Medal for meritorious service at the command. And I'm frankly very proud of that, because it was an important job. I was quite young at the time, and I was very, very fortunate to work for terrific people who chose to give me that award. Beyond that managerial type experience, I've been very active in our church on both the local, parish, and diocesan levels, and I was elected to 2 separate 3-year terms to serve on the standing committee of the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago. For one of those 6 years, I was elected president of the standing committee, and it just so happened that during that year we were engaged in the search for our current bishop. So again, you can imagine, you yourself might imagine what would go into that. We had to choose a search committee, a selection type committee. We had to work with that committee, and it was quite an experience in dealing with people and leading people.
I noticed that in your background, you're a member of the Lake County Bar Association, and also the
State Bar Association.
State Bar Association. Now, I guess those organizations, that's just professionalism, and it doesn't help you as a state's attorney, right?
Well, it depends how you look at it. I am not personally active in either of those organizations. I think most lawyers will belong to their state and local bar associations. And it's quite important, in my opinion, to belong to those organizations, if for no other reason than the bar associations, both state and local, will keep you up to date on developments in the law. They will assist you with continuing legal education. We do have a requirement in Illinois to complete continuing legal education every 2 years, hours outside of the office, and the bar associations can help with that. So it's very important, I think, to be a member for those reasons.
I'd like to just mention, we've mentioned about law, but tell us about your affirmative action training that you may have had during your tours? Your
I can
32
tell you,
years.
yeah, I can tell you that when I was in the Navy, quite obviously, affirmative action type training was paramount. I'm a student of history, an amateur student of history. I take an interest in history,
Okay.
and I'm reminded that the military was not integrated until I believe either 47 or 48.
Yeah, right, Truman, I guess.
That's
Right?
good. That's
Yes,
exactly
it's
right. And my memory of the Navy,
48. Hmm.
I think it was 48, and my memory of the Navy was that it was very, very active in enhancing and uh, strengthening
Hmm.
race relations and that sort of thing. Also, in the Episcopal Church, obviously, we take a very strong position on, I suppose, what we would all call equal opportunity.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and that's an
As a
influence.
matter of fact,
That's an
since you
influence.
mentioned about naval officers, I guess the first naval officers took the test at Great Lakes. I guess it was they have a the entrance of all recruits. I guess come into I forget the name of it there, but it's on Buckley Road there. You know, but
The recruit command.
true correct. But there were about 16 naval officers that took the test, and they made the highest score. They were in the Navy, and I guess the Navy couldn't believe that the test was so high, so they retested them, and there were 16, and they got higher scores the second time. Well, I should say they because there were 13. They call a golden 13, and that so I don't know what year that was, but the Navy was the last unit in the service to integrate. The last ones, you know, I guess the Army was the first, I guess, and Truman was in 1948. But it's been very difficult, been challenging times, I guess, for minorities all the way through.
You know, I've told you before we came on camera that I take an active interest in history. That's, I suppose, my avocation. And when you talk about the Golden 13,
Hmm.
there are so many stories. What I typically concentrate in when I read history is the history of the 1940s and the history of the Second World War.
Hmm.
And there are so many really quite profound stories coming out of that period.
Hmm.
There was, not to go too much off point, but to give you an idea, there was a young lieutenant. I've read this story a number of times by the name of John Fox,
Hmm.
who served in Italy. And of
Okay.
course, during the Second World War, the Army was segregated. He served in the 92nd Infantry Division in Italy, where the combat was really quite terrible.
Hmm.
Not that it isn't always, but in Italy it was very difficult. And on Christmas Day, if you don't mind me telling this
Okay.
story, on
Okay.
Christmas Day, 1944, he was in a small town in Italy with a small group of American soldiers
Okay.
from the 92nd Infantry Division, which was an African American outfit.
Okay.
Some Germans had infiltrated the town in civilian clothes, and the next morning, on December 26th, German troops attacked the town, and the Americans were overwhelmed.
Hmm.
So they fell back, and Lieutenant Fox was in a high point calling in artillery fire. Well, at the end of the day, uh, the Americans fell back. Fox remained behind with a very small band, and he kept calling in artillery fire closer and closer to his position to hold off this enemy attack.
Mm.
And this, as the story goes, his last command was to bring the artillery in right on his position.
Mm.
And the individual back at the artillery battery asked if, well, do you have that right? Do you have those coordinates right? And Fox's response was, fire it. And they did. And the next morning he was found, unfortunately, dead with his troops, but the attack was held off and the Americans retook the town. That was 1944.
Mm.
It wasn't until the 1980s that Lieutenant Fox was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross, and it
Wow.
was in, I want to say, 1992, where he was ultimately awarded the Medal of Honor. And
Hmm.
that's an important story, I think, for all of us to remember in terms of uh, fairness and in
Hmm.
terms of true heroes in this country. I think we tend to use the term hero a bit loosely. But so not to go off too much point, but I know it's Black History Month, and I take an interest in history. So
Well, this is your program, so
okay.
you can promulgate any information that you would like.
I just find it to be a fascinating and really profound story.
What I would like to mention too is that we talked about your relationship with the public defender's office, you know, but what about judges? What relationship would the state's attorney have with judges?
Well, I think in general, we're fortunate in Lake County in that we have a very good, a terrific judiciary.
Okay.
And my perception is that the relationship between bench and bar in Lake County is quite good.
Okay.
The public defender and the state's attorney from time to time, as I understand it, will meet with judges in terms of management of the court system, what can be done to improve the court system, what can be done to deliver legal services to the community in a very timely fashion and in an appropriate fashion. So I think it's very fair to say that the relationship is professional and cordial, and that everyone, including the private bar in Lake County, they strive to, again, provide the best legal services possible to the community at large.
I'd like for you to comment, if you would like, on wrongful convictions. It seems like we have a high percentage of wrongful convictions in Lake County, but I don't know whether you want to give an opinion on it, but what is your take on it?
We have had a number of high-profile wrongful conviction cases over the years.
Okay.
And I think that's well known in the community, and some of these cases have received national press. My position as a candidate for state's attorney is that if elected, I would institute a full-time in-house conviction integrity unit.
Oh.
And what I envision the unit being would be an attorney who I would bring in from outside the office to work full-time as the director of the unit. And the unit would have an investigator, a paralegal, and the unit would have the assets of the state's attorney's office available to it. I see the role of the unit as threefold. First, to review past cases for, I suppose, what might be not to minimize it, but what might be characterized as quality control, to figure out, well, what happened in these cases?
Okay.
What can we do to avoid these types of situations in the future? The unit would also review past cases where allegations or arguments towards the innocence of the person had been raised. We need to look at those. If there is a bona fide argument as to the potential innocence of someone who's been convicted, we need to take a hard look at that. And that's what the unit would do. In terms of the other aspects, I see the unit as monitoring new cases as those cases come in the office, again, to ensure to the extent possible that the cases are handled properly, that mistakes are avoided. And lastly, I would see the unit as coordinating training in the office and potentially outside the office for investigators. And what I mean is the unit would certainly be, I suppose the term could be self-educating. When you learn about mistakes of the past, you can formulate plans to avoid those mistakes in the future. So again, threefold: reviewing past cases, keeping an eye on the new cases as they come in, monitoring those cases, and coordinating training. And I think that would go a long way to the avoidance of wrongful convictions in the future.
To go on a lighter side, though, tell us about your community activities.
Well, over the years, I have a love of baseball. That's the only sport I follow.
Okay.
So I've, from time to time, coached youth league boys baseball and girls softball. And again, as I said before, we're very active and have been very active, our family, in our local congregation, our Episcopal congregation in Grays Lake. And that typically takes up quite a bit of our time.
As a prosecutor, though, I guess your role is different from the judge because I think when a judge sentences a person that's been prosecuted, the judge is looking at rehabilitation as a possible salvation for the person that's been convicted, right? The prosecutor is not looking at rehabilitation, right?
I disagree with that. I think it depends on the case. I think every case is different.
I didn't answer that question right then,
okay.
but you answered it. Answered the question I think our audience want to hear.
Well, if I understand the question, the judge, again, his or her position is to be neutral.
Okay.
And the judge is to hear evidence from both sides, from the prosecution and from the defense.
Okay.
And ultimately, as we all know, the judge will make a decision as to a sentence in any given case.
Okay.
The prosecution, again, every case is different. There are some cases which are so serious in nature that probation is not an option for sentencing.
Okay.
So in those cases, the judge will consider the gravity of the offense, and we have statutory aggravation, matters in aggravation and factors in mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the defense will attempt to put before the judge as many factors in mitigation as it can, and the state will attempt to put as many factors in aggravation before the judge as it can. And then ultimately the decision is left to the judge. This, of course, happens in cases where the punishment is not negotiated between the parties. And what happens there is, for example, the parties being the state and the defense can enter into negotiations and appear before the judge and say, well, look, Judge, we have a negotiation here. The defendant will plead guilty to whatever the charge might be, and we've agreed the defendant would be sentenced to a certain sentence, and of course it's up to the judge to either accept or reject that negotiation and that sentence.
The President of the United States has taken an active part in looking at the crowded prison system. You know, we got the largest total population in the world, I guess, you know. But non-violent cases, I think, is probably what he's looking at, too, the reason that the prison system is overcrowded.
Well, I presume that's right, and we talked about that some minutes ago. I think most of us, perhaps all of us, would agree that persons who, generally speaking, commit violent crimes are going to be sentenced to a term of years, whatever that might be in any given case. Nonviolent crimes, again, remember what I was saying before about restoring the offender to useful citizenship. To repeat myself, I think the movement in the country currently is to take a very close look at these cases when they first come into the system. And if we can avoid sending the nonviolent offender to jail or the penitentiary, and likewise provide that nonviolent offender with those programs and treatments he or she needs to overcome whatever difficulties brought them into the system, well, then that would be the way to go.
Mm-hmm. The Lake County State's Attorney has the determining factor in who's prosecuted and who's not, is his determination.
That's correct.
What would be the determining factor in prosecuting cases?
Well, you know, I think it's fairly self-evident. What occurs and what should occur is a complete and total review of the evidence in any given case. So if the evidence points to probable cause to believe that this person has committed this crime, the person's going to be charged. So it's a relatively simple answer I'm giving, but again, it's looking at the evidence and seeing whether or not the evidence is sufficient and appropriate to charge someone. And typically, when that evidence is there, the person does get charged, in my experience.
Mike, you have a heavy load on your shoulders, aspiring to be the Lake County State's Attorney. The county is about 750,000 people, you know, and relationship with the police association. I know there's many different organization you have to deal with, but it seems like the police association is a great is a large organization you have to deal with.
Well, that's true, and the police work very closely for obvious reasons with the state's attorney's office.
Okay.
Because let's face it, the police are the investigating agency with regard to any criminal activity. It's the police who bring the evidence to the state's attorney's office. I, again, I go back to my Navy days. I worked very closely with what was then known as the Naval Investigative Service, and from time to time with local police departments, because we would occasionally have sailors who would go out into town and get in trouble. And sometimes the service member would be charged at court-martial. Sometimes the person would be charged in Lake County. So again, I do have the experience of working with police in a prosecutorial situation.
In addition to the many challenges that you will be facing, and you're probably facing already, what are some of the ones you face in working in a majority Republican county?
In my practice, don't find political majorities to affect that portion of my practice. Typically, we get cases in the office, and much of what we do is civil litigation. We'll file those cases or respond to those cases in the civil court. And I have to be frank, I really don't find a political aspect to many of those cases. In terms of prosecuting cases, I suppose if I'm answering your question, the best thing to do is to be objective. Look at the evidence. What is the evidence in this case? And if the evidence points to a prosecution, well, then that's where the case is going to go. So if I'm answering your question, that's
well,
what I would say.
Very good. I mean, all answers are right. There's no wrong answers, because you're reflecting your your opinion, this type of thing.
I think the best thing to do is when we're looking at cases to, again, to repeat myself, to be as objective as possible. I mean, objectivity is fairness. And that's what we always strive for in the legal system, whether it's in a civil case or in a criminal case. So if we can be objective and strive to be objective, if we can ask questions of ourselves about the evidence in any given case, I think more often than not, you're going to get the proper outcome. So if what we're saying is we'd like to see more diversity in the bench, in the judiciary, I think it's important to go out and encourage people from all the communities, all of our various communities, particularly minority communities, to become engaged, to work hard, and at the appropriate time when they have the experience, to offer themselves as candidates for the judiciary. I think that's the best way to go.
And then I might mention, too, there's one Hispanic, I guess, judge, and he just happened to be the chief judge.
That's correct.
At this time.
That's correct. And we have other Hispanic judges in Lake County. We have, I don't know what the number is, but we have a very significant number of women judges in Lake County.
Yes.
And I think that's important for obvious reasons, too.
Right,
I think I don't know what the numbers are, but I think if you look historically over the years, I could say over the years I've been in Lake County, the number of women judges in Lake County has increased. And I probably should have counted at some point how many women judges we have, but we have quite a few, and I think that's a good thing. It's a great thing.
It's great. I guess they made women a minority. In fact, so when we say how many minorities you have, then you can count the number of women you have there. Like you mentioned, Hispanic is even the chief judge, but no African Americans.
Well, again, as I say, I think the better course would be to have a judiciary that is reflective of the community at large. But again, we need to have candidates offering themselves from the various minority communities for the judiciary, and that's going to be the way that we achieve that diversity. Maybe one of the things to do is for lawyers who are more senior to encourage younger lawyers or younger people. You started out by asking me about preparatory courses for high school and college.
Yeah.
I think it's important to encourage young people to get into the law. And I think the more young people we have from all of our communities, but in particular from the minority communities, when they come into the law, when they come into the legal, I guess, pipeline would be a phrase, well, we're going to have more and more candidates to become judges in the future. And again, if we're objective about it, I think we'll get there.
Well, let's talk about we have felony cases and then we had misdemeanors. And you want to just elaborate on these are cases that you'll be prosecuting?
Well, misdemeanors by definition are generally lesser crimes which are punishable by no more than 1 year in the local jail.
Okay.
Felonies are more serious crimes which are punishable by in excess of 1 year in the penitentiary. And all in Illinois, and I'm sure in every state, felonies are categorized by their severity. So, for example, as you might imagine, in Illinois, murder, of course, is the most severe type case that we prosecute. Below that, we have what are known as Class X felonies, and these would be cases such as armed robbery and various sex offenses. Below that, we have Classes 1, 2, 3, and 4 felonies, Class 4 being the least serious. Below Class 4 felonies, you have misdemeanors, with the Class A misdemeanor being the most serious. So depending upon the charge, the attorneys and the judge would know what the potential punishment would be for those cases. For Class X felonies, just for example, basically the most serious felonies, probation is never an option, a sentencing option.
Yeah.
Class 4 and Class 3 felonies, sentencing is an option. And there are different exceptions to the rule, of course, depending upon the type of felonies we're talking about. So it's basically a way of categorizing the severity of the offense and the potential maximum punishment.
And then you're always looking at the alternative prosecution program too.
That's true, but again, I want to stress that when we, at least in my mind, when we talk about alternative prosecutions, we are very typically talking about nonviolent offenses. And for example, perhaps property crimes. If we're talking about controlled substances, we're talking about user amounts. We're not necessarily talking about distribution of controlled substances. But again, you tend at that point to get into a different gray area too, in terms of the severity, I suppose, or the extent of the potential distribution.
Court supervision and probation are considered too, right?
Well, they are. Now, supervision is only available in misdemeanor cases.
Okay.
And supervision sounds like probation, but it really, it can be. But typically, supervision simply means that the defendant in a misdemeanor case is sentenced to a certain sentence by the judge, and typically with certain requirements. And if that defendant successfully completes those requirements, he or she will not have a conviction of record. Probation, of course, I think we're all familiar with that. You have a probation officer, and there's a bit more oversight of the defendant as he or she is completing their probation. But again, this brings us back to alternative sentencing. It brings us back to, in nonviolent offenses, doing everything we can with the first-time offender to, I would use the term to get his or her attention. Okay, you've made a mistake here, but we don't want you to necessarily in this nonviolent crime to have a conviction for the rest of your life. Here's what you need to do, and if and when they can complete that, well, that's a good thing.
We mentioned about the criteria and so forth of a state's attorney, well, law really, but I'm sure counseling and making speeches, I guess, in schools and different organizations, you're always called upon to be ready to do that, right?
Well, that happens, certainly. In terms of qualifications, we talked about this the other day also. Certainly the basic qualification is a law license. You can't be the state's attorney if you're not a licensed attorney.
Okay.
But beyond that, and since I'm here because I'm running for state's attorney, I think the voters would be interested in any candidate's background and experience that he or she brings to the job.
Okay.
And we talked about that at the beginning of the interview with my 32 years of practice, with my Navy lawyer background, with my background as a felony assistant in both the public defender's office and the state's attorney's office, and lastly with my I think it's in excess of 22 years in private practice. That's what I bring to the job if elected.
There's also, I mentioned about going into the schools and lecturing. There's opportunities for youngsters from high schools to come into the the court or the maybe the state's attorney's office and so forth, so they can see.
Well, and we
Just how
talked
it
about
goes.
that before, and I think one of the things which the state's attorney's office can do, and one of the things I would very much enjoy doing, is meeting young people and encouraging them to get into the law, whether it be as an attorney or perhaps as a probation officer or a police officer, whatever it might be. I think all of our young people need to be encouraged, and they need to see that they need to see themselves when they visit the courthouse or when they meet with attorneys, public defenders, prosecuting attorneys, police officers. They need to see, hey, you know what, in 5 or 10 years that can be me. So that's important. And again, that gets you back to the whole diversity question, doesn't it? Because if you encourage people from all groups to get involved in the system, well, some of them will, and that's a good thing.
We have to also reach out to the high schools, the educational programs that they have too, guidance counselors and so forth. And because I had a friend of mine, professional, lives in Lake Forest, and I asked him about, we talk about the dropout problem in North Chicago. Well, Waukegan, I guess, in Zion also, but heavily in North Chicago. And I asked him, what about the dropout problem you have there? He said, we don't have any, because the families are doctors, lawyers, and have professions, and when they leave high school, then they go into a profession.
They are or are not.
They are
Yeah,
going into a
right.
profession. There's no dropouts, and that makes a big difference too.
But again, that's what I was getting to too, because in those families, the kids have role models,
Okay.
and it seems to me one of the things that can be done by all of us, regardless of our profession, is to be role models for the young people in the community, and that's very important.
Well, who was your role model?
That's a great question. I was very fortunate to have a wonderful father, and he worked in the automobile industry. He was a service manager at a new car dealership, and of course, I'm biased in his favor, but I have to tell you, I have never known to this day anyone who ever worked harder than he did. But he always had time for me and for the family. It was through him that I developed my passion for baseball,
Oh.
and it was also through him. He was a very optimistic guy, and it was like, well, you can do this. And that gets back to what we were talking about a few moments ago. If you have that role model, if you have somebody in your corner as a young kid, well, yeah, you can wind up doing what it is you want to do. You can wind up realizing your dream. So again, I think it's important that we provide that type of encouragement to the young people in our lives, whether they be in our family or not. But he was a terrific guy, and I certainly would not be sitting here today with you if it had not been for him. So.
Well, I normally reflect upon my background. Was my father left the home when I was 2 years old, and I had a mother as a role model, and aunt that raised me insisted they they took me to church by hand. I didn't have a choice, and I had role models and mentors there among the deacons and the other members of the church, you know. And I would say this for those that are not from that are from a dysfunctional home, that it can be done, and not to give up. That there's many professionals. I know I've talked with ministers, you know, that from dysfunctional homes and so forth. So it can be done, and I every time I get in a crowd of people talking about that you need a two-family, and sometimes you could have two families and they can be dysfunctional. So
Two parents.
two parents, right?
Yeah.
You know. Well, what about your ultimate goal?
Well, right now, I am involved in a primary election, and if I'm fortunate enough to win that primary election, I'll be a candidate in November for state's attorney. I certainly will work hard to win that election, and if elected, my goal is to provide this county
Okay.
with the best state's attorney's office in the state of Illinois. I don't think there's any substitute for that, and I think it's a goal worth pursuing. So that's from day one. That'll be the mission statement of the office.
Hmm. Your wife, is she connected with the county at all?
Well, my wife is a court reporter in
Oh,
the Lake
okay.
County Courthouse, and she's had that job for over 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and she could have her on sometime. She could tell you quite a few stories, I'm sure.
Okay, we'll
But
look forward to
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I'll,
yeah. But
yeah,
she works in Waukegan.
this is fantastic. It is a goal of lawyers to become a judge.
Sometimes, for some attorneys, other attorneys, uh, we have career prosecutors.
Oh,
We have
okay.
attorneys who spend the entirety of their career as prosecuting attorneys. We have other attorneys who spend the entirety of their career as public defenders. We have other attorneys who will be involved in corporate law or the private practice of law, which could include criminal defense or anything else. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, some attorneys do strive to be judges, and others have different goals.
Hmm. Okay, I want to, Michael Perillo, and Mike is like you like to be called. I want to thank you very much
Well, thank you, Dr.
for
Brooks.
spending time from your very busy schedule, and we've had many challenges here with the program.
Okay.
You know, like you're going to have challenges there at the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. So lots of luck, ladies and gentlemen. We have been talking with attorney Michael J. Perillo, Senior.
Junior.
Junior. I'm
Junior.
sorry.
Unfortunately, senior's gone. So
It's very
unfortunately.
important. And he's been giving us an overview of the Lake County State's Attorney's Office, and we hope that you've been benefited from the information that's been promulgated to us. His military background, he started with the Judge
With the
Advocate's
Navy,
office there
right.
in the Navy. At the matter of fact, the contemporary of my time there as an equal opportunity officer. And I really appreciate this, and we hope you a lot of success.
Well, let me interrupt you for a minute. Let's remind everybody that Election Day is
Oh,
March
yeah, that's right.
15th.
That's right.
And I do believe early voting starts on February 29th, and you can check that with the county clerk.
Okay, okay.
So get out and vote.
Right, this is important. As a matter of fact, why is there such a poor turnout there in Lake County? We know that's all over the country, though. Poor
Well,
turnout.
I don't know. I'm hoping
Okay.
there'll be a good turnout for this election.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Community Forum. My name is Dr. Wardell Brooks Sr., your host.